additional listening sessions for the board, and April has created a, guess what, spreadsheet that could, has a couple different options. And then there's going to be, there's some proposals for some committee ideas, some like special committee ideas, and then we need to wrap it up by kind of solidifying a position on BCE. So let's do BCE last, because I think our previous discussions will inform the.
We discussed BCE last meeting, didn't we? I'm sorry, we've discussed, because it's in policy committee this month.
We did.
Please remind me, what was the outcome of that?
We decided that we were going to keep the functions of our current committee structure in BCE as hard-coded, but give the board a little bit more flexibility as to how to do that. Right now, there's a draft that will be discussed in policy.
Okay, so it's not done.
On Monday. So we don't.
Okay,
need, I don't
so
think
we had
need
the discussion
to discuss
before
yes.
policy.
Yeah, because
okay.
that was all we discussed in the last meeting.
Okay, so we haven't voted on a final version.
No.
Okay,
and in fact,
thank
it'll come to the board next month.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Okay, thank you for, I couldn't remember where that landed. Okay, well, that makes this easier then. Okay, so do we want to kick it off with the listening sessions? April,
Sure.
Are you ready with that? Okay, had you forwarded your spreadsheet to anybody else?
No.
Okay, I'll do that right now.
Okay. So
What?
over the last couple of years, as we're modifying the BDDH-1, the policy regarding public participation, I believe at board meetings, and specifically related to public comment, we've often gotten feedback that it's difficult to sign up. People feel like maybe their voices aren't heard. They don't have opportunities to reach out. We do know that we get a lot of information from surveys. We get a lot of emails from the community. And we do get people that come for public comment. However, I also know that a lot of us would like to open up opportunities. And this is something the previous board talked about, opening up opportunities for us to have a different way to also hear from the public. And what I'm proposing is that on a rotational schedule, we have 2 board members that will have a designated date at a designated location in which we would publicize the public can come and meet with us. And I would propose that to take place for a course of 1 year in which we collect data as far as how many people come, how many different people come, what are the different topics that are discussed, and that will help inform our decision as to whether or not those listening sessions seem to be serving the perceived need that we've been told. And I created a spreadsheet that's got a lot of different options, but my favorite is the one in which we meet every 3 months. We can start these on different months. May might be. I started putting this together about 2 months ago, and then it kept getting moved, so I kept having to change the months. And the one that I have that's every 3 months that's highlighted excludes board leadership because I simply know that board leadership currently spends 30 to 40 plus hours on other district work. And certainly if they want to be in the rotation, that would be great. But I would feel that it's appropriate, given the amount of time that they already devote to the workings of the district, that they're not included on that. I know a lot of us also have multiple committee meetings and also spend a considerable amount of work, but that was where I came up with that thought process. and I could take care of coordinating. My idea is that we would select different dates, so it wouldn't necessarily be the third Wednesday of the month. We want to do it on different types of dates on different times at different locations. So I would target, if I can get a school to agree for me to use their commons, for example, of an evening for a couple of hours. So one might be at like Battle or Gentry, or trying to target various areas of the district and at various dates and times, so that if someone can't make it in May on Wednesday night, they can make it in August on Tuesday night or something like that.
Thanks, April. Okay, so yeah, go ahead, Jean.
I guess I just had some questions. One, I guess yes, I think that we should be creating some additional opportunities for the public to engage with board members in a more, I guess, formal setting, right? Like where it's a little more advertised. And I guess I just also am curious, is your vision, April, for these particular ones, that it would be sort of like open office hours type thing, right? Like
Yes.
general public comment, people can just come and like share whatever. And I guess also because one of the things that has come up in the past was the idea of creating specific listening sessions around topics that we knew were particularly controversial, or might, where people had a lot to say, or where we were getting lots of comments. So I just to clarify, so this is a little bit more of like informal in the sense of like sort of an open forum. And then I guess a chance is the idea then as well, different than our public comment at the regular meetings where the full board is there, like that those two board members could potentially ask follow-up or have more of a conversation, maybe depending on how many people showed up.
Absolutely.
like
My
that.
vision is it's more like an open office hours. I know some of us in the past have regularly scheduled, hey, I'm going to be here, come talk to me. Much more of an informal, we're there. Anybody who wants to come and bring concerns or just talk through something can certainly do that. And then we have the opportunity to follow up or share that information with the board. And also, in tracking the information, we're able to say, we're hearing a consistent theme. Maybe that's something that we need to investigate further. I do also agree with you, though, on if we do have a particular topic that is big in nature, boundaries are the thing that comes to my mind right now, but SRG or maybe some new initiative that we decide to do, there might be an opportunity that the board might want to have a separate listening session with the entire board that would be more formal, where people would come and kind of give public comment like they do today. But this would be certainly a less formal area, so that we're offering up board members to be available to listen to public concerns. And it doesn't have to be all of us in a room at all at the same time.
I like the idea. I think if we did it quarterly, I, as board president, would feel like I mean, we're talking about like one additional listening session a year. I can totally make that happen. If we were doing them every single month, that might be different. But I'm able to be part of that rotation for a quarterly. Blake just sent around an email with a draft policy that he created about listening sessions, and you can talk about it a little bit. It looks pretty specific. It looks more like the rules of engagement would more closely mirror what public comment looks like at our regular sessions. And that's like a little bit of a different format than like having open office hours. So if the intent is for it to be more informal, like just like a come and go, you don't have to sign up. You can come with your kids if you need to. You can, and we're not, if there's only two of us, we're not making decisions. We would have to be mindful of people coming to talk about things that should be handled by staff, or, like making a complaint about, because we're going to get people to say like, I need to make you aware of this situation that my principal did this, and I don't think you should have done that. Sorry, no. Like that is something that needs to be handled at the building level. So we would need to probably publicize some sort of parameters for things that should not be brought to us, and then be prepared to say, I'm sorry, this is actually not appropriate for you to, not an appropriate concern for you to bring straight to the board. Would you, here's how you handle that.
And maybe even just like an FAQ with some examples for people to be able to wrap their minds around. And also we can't entertain things that might be
The
potentially
subject of a grievance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You say the same thing that you say before.
Right. Yeah. No, nothing that could be part of a grievance or a disciplinary procedure. But I would imagine, I think it's a good idea to track the types of subjects people are bringing to us, because that could inform like a future like ad hoc committee or something like that. We kind of keep track of what things kind of surface. But I would want, I mean, I'm just anticipating based on the fact that I did office hours for a year. It was definitely like some overarching themes, and a couple of times I was like, I'll listen to you, but I can't really do anything about that. So this is the person you
Sure.
need to
And
talk to.
I also want to track, kind of who's coming, from the sense that, do we have, are we having 5 people come in a month, but the same 2 people come every month? But that's
Yes.
all we ever get, and so maybe that the need isn't really there, perhaps. That's why I think we need to track the data for a year on those areas to determine if this would make sense to continue in the future.
I think that it would. It does make sense to me, but I think that everybody needs to understand that it is what we say. I mean, what it is. It's a listening session. And because, like, even right now, I'm getting pummeled out there about school choice and stuff, 2 in the last week. But, my thing is that when people do come, we all promise that we all are listening. But those sessions, I think, would be fantastic. I think you'll get a whole different set of people that would be willing to come, because it's an open session and not in a formal setting. But I also think that I can't wait to hear Blake's take on it, because I'm sure he's got this in there, that what they say needs to be heard, and it needs to be recorded at some level, so that we could come back together and work on those issues that the public is bringing in to us, and shoot them out to the appropriate places so that they can be addressed. Because if we want people to come, we have to let them see that we do hear and that we do address whatever the concerns. But I also think that listening session needs to be, encourage them. If you come and you always have a negative approach every time you come, and I observe this, if a person always come with negative, after a while, I don't care how good, how perfect you are, when you see them walking in the door, you're gonna go like this, because you know it's negative. But people, I just encourage folks that I've worked with in the past, if they are gonna come with the open attitude and ask for help. and not talk about how bad we are.
And I want to jump in, if you don't mind. Thank you, President Waters, for what you brought up. You
Took the words out of your
yes,
mouth.
you did. You did. Because natural human tendency is to want to nurture and to want to help and to want to embrace. But, as long as they understand, yes, we want to answer all questions and give you the best answers and solve all the problems, there are some that do need to come back to administration for us to really chomp on. And I really appreciate what you said. I think high-performing boards actually that I've studied in the past have done listening sessions and focused on agenda items on the upcoming board, they time their meetings to where, okay, this is coming up on the board agenda, this is hot topics, this is when you can come and discuss, and a good time to clarify certain points and so on. I know that doesn't work every single time, but I know that was the emphasis of the listening sessions, was to make sure that things that you all were going to vote on, the public had a chance to have dialogue with you and have input with you concerning that. But I love it. Thank you, President Waters. Okay.
Whoa, green cards flying everywhere. Paul, go ahead.
And I think we need a script at the very beginning, like you guys said, because like Alvin said, or like Mr. Cobbins said, it should be a listening session. So while we may ask questions, it's not a discussion session. It's to receive input from the general public. And I think we need to make sure that we have a script and any messaging. It's understood that we're not there to debate. We're there to listen to them and get the information. While I'd like to ask questions in those, I really don't want to. It's really not a two-way conversation. It's a one-way conversation from the public to us. At least
Although,
as I see it. Yeah.
could I clarify? I'm sorry, I have hard time seeing all you guys. But if someone brings us something like a teacher brings us something and says my classroom's too small, I could respond and say, well, that is something that you need to discuss with your principal. Right? That's what we want to do, is if they're bringing us something that really falls in the lane of the principal or HR or whatever, we're making sure we're pointing them in the right direction if we know what that direction is.
Yeah, that's not what I was. I was saying,
Okay.
I don't, I like, for example, we've got a charter school discussion that we're having in our community. If we're listening to what they're saying, not debating back and forth with people, and we want to make sure that the people understand that it is to listen and not to, not to address issues in that way.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't, I think that while I understand the purpose of a listening session, it is excruciatingly difficult for me a lot of times during public comment to sit there and remain, emotionless and, stone-faced, when different things are coming up. I certainly understand that when we're at one of these listening sessions, let's say there's one about, special education or SRG, and if a community member asks a direct question about something, and we have the answer, or if we have a clarifying question, I think we should be able to ask that. But, in terms of going back and forth, we'll go, well, is your classroom really too small, or are you just really, do you need some work with setting up a classroom and things like that? It's, discussion, a back and forth, but I think that as long as we keep it open for there to be clarifying questions and things like that, to make sure that we're then taking that information, back to, the rest of the board, to our work sessions and everything else to, talk about that. Yeah, I'm all for these things. I think the more of them we can do, the better. I also think it's something where, having kind of, set ones is a good idea. And then having kind of just, hey, this is a new thing that's kind of popping up that we're seeing on the internet or in the media or whatever that we need to, or we're starting to see a thematic thing at public comment where lots of folks are coming and talking about something, we can schedule one. And then to help show the public then that these things are happening and that we are listening and that we are bringing that information back, I would suggest then potentially then during the report of the board president during the next regular board meeting, there's kind of a review of that from, Blake, I like your idea in your thing where there's, there's there's 3 different people that are at said listening session. There's one person that's the, I forget the word that you used.
Presiding officer.
Yeah, the presiding officer, where that person then, Ms. Farrell was the presiding officer at the most recent listening session about, SRG. Could you, give a brief summary on that? I think that would be a good way to show that, again, we are listening, and these are the kind of the things, the follow-up that's happening, so.
Okay. So,
And I think that this is just something that we might try, and it morphs over time. The first session, the first time might look vastly different from the last time we do it, because we learn things as we go and we adjust and we modify.
well, if we can pull one off in May and focus on attendance area changes, I could see that being pretty beneficial to the process. And just allow people to give us their thoughts. We may need to have 2 people at one and 2 people at another if we can't get to everybody. I do think it makes sense to have a time limit, because we don't want people to be sitting there for 9 hours.
I was thinking a 2-hour window, like
At the most.
we'll be there for 2 hours. If you want to come, that's where we're at.
Okay.
I'll say, like, the draft policy I sent to y'all, its creation was at an onus of trying to move a conversation I was having with Dr. Siepelman around, is there a way for us to move general public comment out of our business meetings, having prioritization like at that like Monday night meeting be able, and like public comment be on the decisions that we're making, and give a different space for that to kind of give that separation. So I didn't want to give that preface so that you could know like kind of where that stuff is at. In this, I say 90 minutes. The only reason I say 90 minutes is in that sense of that's how much like allotted speaking time we're going to give, knowing that there's transition time that's going to, at the end of the day, lead to it being probably 2 hours, right?
Okay.
In that sort of kind of capacity of it. The other thing I think is important, like in what you'll read in this is like, there's that space of being able to pre-register and having some dedicated slots there, and that pre-registration being able to, those folks can get more time to speak. And then there is that slotted space of after those pre-registered comments, anyone who shows up, you sign up and, first come, first serve of being able to give a normal 3-minute comment just in other ways, kind of mimicking a similar process that exists for the city. Like that's kind of what I was looking at when I was creating this. Now, but that is, right, when y'all read that, take into consideration, this was thinking about this to remove general comments out of our meetings. Like if we are, I think there's a difference in looking at these listening sessions if it's around a dedicated topic, right? If it's a dedicated topic, then yeah, it makes sense to say that like, all right, come show up, be able to come talk. I do think that there should be some form of structure, some form of way of saying that there's a limitation on like how much speaking time you have and things of that nature, just so that there is just a way of like everyone is in awareness of like what's going to outplay in that moment. I also think having people sign up, right, whether that's like in a pre-way or in a way of like as you walk in, you put in that space, so that we do have like a way of follow-up, so that if it isn't, if we do utilize listening sessions from a general standpoint, not to take away general public comment or anything like that, but it's just like it's a general listening session on a specific topic, we're able to do that follow-up that y'all are talking about, right? So like we don't have to do the comment of in moment. And part of that philosophy, I'll say in past conversations with previous boards around, because I asked like when I was like, why don't we like comment in like that? Yes, it's around not having a debate or anything like that. But part of it too is not trying to give a perception that there is a like that board members have a preferential of what's being talked about there, when there can be follow-up that's done through email or phone conversation with that constituent, whether that's through staff, right? There's a lot of times where it would be like something gets brought up and like staff would be like, hey, we wrote this one down, we're gonna be reaching out to them because we had that contact information, right? Or like board members, like we knew we had that contact information, we could call, like there's times of I've called and been like, hey, could you give me some more clarification of like what you were sharing that night and things like that. But that's not happening in meeting and stuff. So I did just want to share that, and like what I shared with y'all is that draft. And I do think it just depends on how we want to utilize them. If we want to utilize listening sessions solely as a tool of major topics, there's a different approach, I think, that is optimal. If we're wanting to do this as a systematic kind of listening session space where it's like, we hold these quarterly, or we hold these, like how I outlined like a preference of like on certain months throughout the year, right? That there is a uniform way that that's happening. There's a uniform date that that's happening on, whether it's like the third Friday or like the third Tuesday, and it's on a set time and things like that. If we're doing that on a systemic way, but like I said, but in that, that's a different approach, and that the optimal way of doing that, from my perspective, is different than if we're just using it for major topics that are coming up. So I think there is a fluidity that can exist in a policy that gets set there, while at the same time, if we do want to have like a systematic way in tandem with a major topic, having some deep structured way, and then also a caveat like we do in a lot of our policies of saying that like additional listening sessions could be held on major topics that, you know, that go outside of these parameters, right? So
I'd be hesitant, a couple things. I'd be hesitant to put this into policy just because it does sound like it's something that we want to be relatively fluid with. So coming up with, you know, very black and white sort of rules of engagement and things like that, I would just have concerns about, number one. Number two, then my thoughts on having these listening sessions and things like that is so that they are significantly less structured than public comment during meetings. Public comment during meetings, you've got 3 minutes and then that's it, end of conversation. You're done and that's that. A lot of folks can get out what they need to say in 3 minutes. A lot of folks can't. A lot of folks don't come because, you know, of that intimidation factor of knowing that they only have 3 minutes to talk. And so I certainly understand that we want to have some sort of structure, but I would be hesitant to put anything in where it's like, hey, we're going to have X number of speakers on this topic, you know, and everybody has 3 minutes, and there may be some back and forth, but your first kind of general statement is 3 minutes. You know, it's going to end up limiting folks from coming who probably have really, really important stuff to say. And so I would be hesitant to put much limitation on the amount of time that a person has to speak. And I know I'm kind of rambling here, but to the point of that being, somebody needs to cut me off. And so we're going to be at these things and somebody's just going to keep going and going and going and going. It's like, hey, I think what you're trying to say is X. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Then you can ask those questions. But by putting that standard, you know, you've got 180 seconds to say what you need to say, it's going to.
That makes it a little formal. I think
Right.
that makes it a little formal. And I agree that having it in policy, we may get to a point where after we've gone through several iterations of this, we feel like we have a process nailed down that we would want to put in policy. But since we're kind of trying it out and wanting to be able to make adjustments, having a set policy seems a little advanced. We could certainly come up with a generalized procedure and, you know, kind of see how it goes. I mean, we don't know how many people are going to come. If there's 20 people in the room as soon as it opens, then obviously the first person that is talking can't talk for 30 minutes. You know, so they would have to sign up, and maybe, you know, if there are people waiting, then, you know, we try to limit each conversation to a couple of minutes. But if there's no one else there, then, you know, so we kind of have to be able to play some of it by ear. So April, I see your hand up. Jean has her orange card. So April, you go ahead, and then Jean.
Yeah, this came out of trying to address, for lack of a better word, the complaint that the board wasn't accessible necessarily to hear a variety of topics from a variety of individuals. So not necessarily specific to a theme or anything like that. We just have constituents who feel like they can't reach out to the board, or they aren't heard for whatever reason. I do agree. I mean, obviously, in order to track who's coming and how often and that kind of thing, we would need to have some sort of sign up. But pre-registration, that goes back to the kind of issue that we've got now where people say, well, you have to pre-register for public comment, and that's an issue. We don't want to cause a ton of obstacles. We want to provide an avenue that is as open as possible to get to the most number of people. And I have my views on what I expect will, my predictions on what I think will end up happening with this. And so, I mean, I think doing something really informal would be beneficial.
All right, Jean, what you got?
So I think we should try it, I guess. I think that it's worth trying. I don't know that, I would agree that maybe, at least at this point, not trying to propose something in policy or something like that, I think I would be open to quarterly or bi-monthly, or every other month. I don't know if that's bi-month. I never know which is which. But I think, and it being a little more informal, and in terms of thinking about like how that might work in terms of the time allocated, if we have a set sort of max time for the whole listening session, one way we might want to approach it is just thinking about like when you go to testify, right, for a hearing down at the state capitol, they sort of do a quick glance around the room and say like, how many people are here, you know, to actually speak? And people raise their hand and they kind of do a quick calculation of like, okay, you know, if we want to leave like, if we're there for 2 hours and we want to say like 90 minutes because there might be questions or transitions or things, and you sort of do the quick math and say, okay, like we're going to ask people to limit their comments to this amount of time max, just to make sure that we have time to hear the people that are here in the moment. And it might be that other people show up, so again, like you leave that time. So I think like some general guidelines and framing, and then there's going to be a certain amount, I think, of flexibility that's going to depend a little bit on who shows up and how many people show up, and also honestly probably on who the board members are at that particular one. I think we all have slightly different ways that we tend to engage, and I think we just need to recognize that there might be some variation because of that, and as long as we all feel okay with that. The other thing I was going to ask, and I don't know if this would be benefit or not, is, you know, if we're only talking about 4 times, like let's say we're going with the quarterly, do we want to have a administrator that can be there not to respond, but to just sort of like be there and be able to sort of like take notes? If we don't, and we want it to just be board members, then I think that's fine too. But I think we should, then we need to make sure that as board members, we are being really careful to note down what the topics are and stuff so that it can be shared. Again, not to have somebody respond, not to have administration responding, but just to make sure that if there are clarifying questions that they would want asked or things like that. And I just think it's something we could consider.
I kind of want to wrap up this conversation because there's still several other things that we want to talk about, and it feels like the consensus is that we want to do this. Let's try to get a date in May. April, I'm going to put you in charge of polling the board to see, like come up with your spreadsheet. Go ahead and put John and I in that rotation, and then whoever is in May, you guys figure out a date and a location, and and then kind of come up with a loose calendar, and I can help with whoever to work on like the scripting or the parameters, or just kind of a general procedure, and let's just do it. Okay, awesome. Now, what's the worst that could happen? Okay, so so we'll the next thing we were going to talk about was the possibility of adding a third monthly meeting. And Blake, if you want to kind of go over what your thoughts were on that, and then we can kind of, I am watching the time, so yeah.
So yeah, the onus of making this request for us to have like a preliminary conversation of it was, as we've been working on things, there are things that pop up in conversation that deal with our governance work as a board, which yes, pertains to, at times can be touching on action items in the future that we'll be deciding on, or gets brought up through the process of us working on something, right? And it being that, we need to probably talk about this as a group. And so what I thought would be really good is for us just to have a standing third monthly meeting that exists there, that board leadership can let us know at like the beginning of that month or wherever, and say like, hey, we're going to be utilizing that meeting night. So please don't hold it as tentative, hold it as confirmed, or being like, hey, there isn't anything major that we need to talk about around our governance. And so very specifically, this third meeting space being around governance, so that the board could just meet. Like staff doesn't need to have to be there unless it's like board leadership thinks that, it'd be good to get their feedback on what we're talking around with this governance work. But that this meeting, this third meeting, not be about voting on any business, not be like no action items, nothing around that. It solely be about, let's talk about things that deal with how we operate, how we work as a team. What are those areas of like, what are some refining ideas that we have? I think some of this comes into like what we're talking about right now could be in that meeting, right? Mm-hmm. And like we could dedicate that time, right? It could be that this meeting is not going to go beyond 2 hours. Like we're going to cap it at that. And if it goes like, well, we still got more we got to talk about, we'll go ahead and already say next month, we're going to be talking more about this then, right? So I think it just gives us a little bit more playing room. Not that we always have to meet, and not that that has to be on every month. As I was sharing and talking with this with President Waters, was like, it would make sense. We don't have a tentative third meeting in June or July or August, right? Like, or May, because we have graduations that are occurring around that time, right? But maybe or December or November. So it wouldn't be every month that tentative is there, but certain months that tentative sits there for us to really potentially utilize in those ways. And that way we don't have to scramble to find a date for a governance work. There's pieces that if it gets brought up, we're able to say like, oh yeah, we can do that next month in that tentative meeting held. Oh, go ahead, everybody, confirm, don't hold it, make sure it's there. Or you can take it off your calendar, folks.
I did, Paul, I see you, but I did also think that third meeting could be a good time for if the board wanted to discuss like our part of the superintendent evaluation as we go through the process. Like the board would talk about like what's our baseline performance prior to meeting with Dr. Yearwood about that. Like we've already had some internal discussion so that when we're having those conversations with him in executive session, it's a little bit more streamlined. And so there could be times when that third meeting would be a closed meeting. Otherwise, it would be open, and it could be at any location. We can post a meeting to occur anywhere, but so that's just, an option to be closed. Go ahead, Paul.
You actually started hitting on what I was going to. I think from a Sunshine perspective, this is wonderful because we as a group don't get a chance to talk unless we post a Sunshine meeting, we put it up there. So I know that, we'll have, I'll talk to Blake 1 month, I'll talk to John another, I'll talk to April, but we never sit down and talk about some of our broad ideas just in general. And I think that's a wonderful time so that quite frankly, that we can follow the Sunshine Law. We're not just talking, one-on-one and then never bringing it to the rest of the board. We're actually having these discussions. And then, of course, if we have to talk about personnel or something like that, we can have that general discussion, close the meeting, kick everybody out. But I do think from a Sunshine perspective and quite frankly, from a board collaboration perspective, that I think it's a great idea and I think we should do it.
Just to be clear, the board currently does not violate the Sunshine Law. So
no, and that's
right,
what I was saying is
right.
that like we'll have a conversation one-on-one.
I see you over there.
We'll have a conversation one-on-one, talk about
right.
things, and then never
Which
bring
is
it
not
to the
a
whole
violation.
board.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what
So,
I was saying
and
is that there are ideas that
Yeah.
get banting about between two people, but not never get brought to the board as a whole.
Right.
Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so we're actually very like stalwarts about the sunshine law. You know, my husband is a journalist, so we believe in the sunshine law and we follow it meticulously. So we would post all of these meetings. I saw a card. Oh, April, you have your hand up, and then whoever else had a card.
So sometimes big words throw me. So I want to clarify, Blake, when you talk about the third meeting, being kind of focused on our governance work, are you talking, would an example be kind of what Paul just talked about, you know, that this is a meeting where it's an opportunity for the board to get together to talk about some ideas that the board has and how that works? Or are you talking more about all this stuff that we've kind of been doing with MSBA?
Both. So I
And-
think it really comes into where, if this becomes a practice, right? I think it really comes into what are the major needs of that board that at that time, right? So in that sense of, if we already had this practice going on, that could have been where, all right, it's not tentative, it's every month, folks, because we're going to be doing that with Janet. That's that date. There we go. And if it's a
Right.
board that there's only one member that is new, or everyone's been on the board for some time, right? It can become more of those spaces constantly that's around. Hey, a couple of us have been talking about this one-on-one. Could we have a larger discussion just around this? And maybe that is where, right, staff does get invited in, or it goes, board leadership says, like, we're going to talk about that, but we're not going to bring staff in yet because it's such a baby seed idea at this moment. Let's get a little bit more formulated as a group to then make the ask of staff to come in and talk more. So I think it more becomes a useful tool for board leadership and the board to use for what they need in that moment. In how they're wanting to look at stuff.
Yeah.
Because like one of those
Because-
things too, sorry.
Yeah.
I think
No,
one of those
go ahead,
areas
go ahead.
too could be like what we talked about here in the 3 salary schedules, right? That could be a moment where if we already had this in practice, like next month, we could know, and board leadership would say, that's the topic we're talking about. Staff, we want you to come in and kind of talk a little bit more with us and what we're looking at. It's not a decision, it's nothing like that. It deals with governance because it's our fiduciary duty, right? Like that is our governance work. And so we want to know, we want to workshop that through, and it just becomes that additional space.
I think, like, in general, that is what the work session is supposed to be. Like, what we're talking about is what most boards have as their work session, but our district is so big and there's so many things going on. Our work sessions, we have a whole focus on academics, which we need to have, and then we end up having like just the burden of requirement that there are things that have to be processed in our work sessions that, like, here it is 10:30, and now we're getting to like typical kind of work session stuff. So I'm for it.
Yeah, just one comment. It's as you talk about bringing staff in, all I ask is that we come through. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, because I don't want anyone to come to me and go, I got a letter from the board. I got to show up to the meeting. What did I do wrong? Yeah, subpoena. So
Yes, I say staff, meaning obviously this is like board leadership coordinating with you on being like, hey, we're talking about finances, and we want you there, we want Heather there, and maybe the finance team there, and things like that. I think it also becomes in that way too, where it's not an additional meeting that Noel has to be at, right? Or whoever is board secretary has to be at. We can appoint someone there because no major actions are happening. Unless we really do think that, from yours, and if we're bringing in staff and it goes like, it would probably be good, Noel, it would be good for you to be there because of just the content that it's moving in a direction where this is going to move to a space where it might be good for you to be present, right? But that becomes the evolving piece of what's being talked about.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I'm totally for it. I think figuring out, like, obviously a week that is not already designated as board meeting or work session, which leaves us with 2 weeks. And, if we're trying to go for a different day, maybe Wednesday. So now I don't know what that does to committee meeting. So just like making sure that we, I think through all of that. I'm totally in favor. And then I was going to say, I think for it to work and not turn into what our current work sessions are, I think we should be really clear that there are no action items ever. This is a third meeting.
100%.
I don't think
No
Noel should
staff
ever have to,
hires,
no staff
no-
hires, like nothing. We have
Yeah.
2 additional meetings. We can then make that adjustment and say, okay, like this,
Yep.
this one is now open for that sort of space, but like this is a dedicated
Board discussion only, yeah.
discussion
No
sort of-
action items, no public comment, no staff hires, no, like,
Like,
I'm going,
nothing.
the only stipulations that I'm going to possibly demand are that we have like desserts.
I approve of that.
So there shall be cookies or donuts or something. So to try to schedule something, I think I might just kind of send out like people's general idea of like, do we want to try to have something pretty close to between the Monday and the Thursday? Like, because I will say it is nice to have a part of the month that where there is not a board meeting. You know, like if people need to like schedule travel away, like there is only a part, like a small part of the month where you can travel and not have a meeting. So if we plan another meeting right smack dab in the middle of that, then it's like, okay, we only have like 5 days between everything we have to do with committee meetings and everything else. So I want to be mindful of that, but that's a calendar issue. I think we're agreed that we want to do listening sessions and at least have something tentatively placed on every single month's calendar. And then we'll, like, board leadership can set like an expectation of when we'll let the board know what, like, if, are we going to do it this month or not? Probably we will.
And maybe, right, as we're mulling it over, maybe this becomes a thing where we solidify it at retreat, right? And like get that going there. Not. I know
Oh,
you said
like
that
the
maybe we
calendar?
could do it. Yeah, the calendar, how it goes,
Oh.
because I know that there's larger conversations we have to have about like spacing and location because things have already gone there, right? And so that does come in that way of if we know, all right, yes, we're going to implement it always I'm just going to say the third Tuesday of every month, right? And staff lets us know, Aslan's only available these 2 months. Then board leadership knows, okay, we got to find another location for the other ones that we're going to do, right? And so I think that sets it up to where we can really maybe at retreat get to that.
Yeah.
I think it would be good to not have any of these here.
Agree.
I mean, the more that we can get out in the high schools, in the middle schools, in the elementary, I mean, I think that this building's intimidating for a lot of folks for a lot of reasons.
For a third meeting?
For our governance work?
All of the above.
Oh, I think we could have, we could have it at a coffee shop or someone's house.
So just,
you know?
just getting it out there and, you know, if it's an open public thing, is not here would be my vote.
Okay. So good, we're good on listening sessions, we're good on third monthly meeting. The other idea that had been proposed was to develop an ad hoc committee that centered around special education. Paul and April came up with a proposal, and I will have to pull it up and forward that to everyone. Paul, do you want to talk about that?
This comes from, and I know we've all heard about it in the community for years, possibly at some point forming a special education advisory group. I feel like before you jump to that step, you need to have an ad hoc group to actually discuss the need for it. And my idea for the task force is essentially assessing the communications and information needs of our special education families from a board perspective, having them maybe review the local special education compliance plan and seeing if there's any issues, and forming a plan to establish that permanent special education advisory board, including recommending how that board functions and what a policy would look like for that permanent board. But some states actually mandate a special education advisory board, and one of their primary focuses in those states is actually to look at the special education compliance plan and to advise the board from a parent perspective on special education issues. So I'm throwing that out there as I'd be more than happy to revise the memo to have a little bit of a different timeline, because I think it was sent to you earlier this year. But that's in general what it is, as an idea.
The original email was actually sent January 30th. And it, so I just forwarded it, but it's, since it's a task force, it would have like a kind of a focus on certain objectives. So it wouldn't be something that would be added to like a committee policy or anything like that. There's no policy here, there's no policy implications here. Am I correct? It's just, it's in place for a set amount of time, or up until the objectives have been
Up
met.
until the objective is
Have been met.
And that's like you said, the special education community has been asking for this advisory committee, and this would essentially be an ad hoc committee to inform the board about a potential special education advisory committee and how that would function.
Can you explain like who would be on it?
Ideally,
And April, feel free to hop in, because this is yours too.
Go ahead.
The intent is for parents who have students with IEPs, 504s, including families who have kids in I don't know what we call them, but the district classrooms, and kids who have IEPs or 504s that are in our regular ed classes, and including potentially representation from Rosetta and Core. In my ideal world, there would be representation from every building, makes it a very large group. But I know that realistically, it's potentially possible that we would not have representation from every group, every school. But it's to be broad. I don't want us to focus necessarily on families that only have kids in district classrooms, or families that only have 504s. It's broad.
So oh, go ahead, Jean.
I was curious, this might be something different, but specifically to Paul and April, how do you see the function of this as different than like the task force or advisor? I'm not sure what actually the technical name is for the group that I know Dr. Yearwood has convened a group that is looking at not exactly the same things, but some similar things, and just wondering about how you see the two groups kind of working together or sort of addressing different issues for you. What does that look like?
I actually do see a lot of overlap, but certainly Dr. Yearwood's is from an administrative perspective, whereas ours would be at a higher board perspective. So certainly it could be combined to do all of those functions. And but that's also part of the reason for the ad hoc is that I don't want to direct what that group would look like. I feel like it should be a parent driven thing. And if the parents want a group like that, they should be proposing also part of the function.
And I spoke with Dr. Yearwood about this last Wednesday. Go ahead, Dr. Yearwood.
Yes, transparency is great. We always want to, because we know we have areas of growth in special education that we want to embrace. And as you talk about an ad hoc, the idea of the advisory committee that was formed was to listen to parents, listen to those out there, and make determinations about, okay, where are the gaps, where are the holes, and then slowly begin to fill it. Like, for example, we just completed our survey of our special needs parents and their scholars, and we're going to take that data, analyze it, see where the gaps are, and fill it. If we're going to move to sort of an ad hoc, I would encourage or ask, why not use the committee that's already in existence there to serve as that advisory piece? And then if there are things that are being brought in from parents or whoever, bring it to us, because we have a great representation. We have, not only do we have parents, we have our community advocates, we have, our school administrators present. And in reality, we are discussing some really tough topics with the understanding of growth in mind. And everyone has come to the table. There were apprehensions at first, but we've been able to work through that. And now we are working in a frame of, okay, what do we need to do to get better and stronger? So I'm with you, and always board input. If there are things that we need to inform the board about, if there are things the board wants us to invest, not a problem, because the bottom line is you want growth, just like you do. So yeah.
Right, totally agree. And I think that group could be the foundation for a slightly broader group than what that is, because that is a little bit of a limited group, and I think it's dominated by, well, I shouldn't say dominated, but there are more people who are more of the special education, not the special education children who are in the general education classrooms. It's more focused in on those who are not in the general classroom, as I understand it. And so it would be good to be broad. And also 504 parents my understanding is that there's not a 504 parent on that. Is that correct?
I am not the invitation was opened up to the different schools to have representation. So it wasn't like this was the group. So if we need to broaden it, that's not a problem. We can bring in more parents, more schools, whomever we want to, because we want people coming to the table to discuss and have a very open discussion about how can we get better. So I agree with you. I mean, if you could broaden it, great.
April, go ahead.
First, yes, the timeline, absolutely, all that stuff needs to be adjusted. Secondly, I think that the group that we're proposing at this point is heavily parent driven, or includes CPS employees who also have children that have IEPs and 504s. And we can certainly determine what we want them to focus on, and we can make sure that they potentially are not focusing. We can find out what Dr. Yearwood's committee is focusing on, and what goals that they plan to accomplish in the same period, and we can direct our ad hoc committee to focus on something else to advise the board with. But given the level of feedback that we have received, for some of us before we were even on the board, I feel very strongly that we need to have more parent voice. And I believe this ad hoc committee, for the limited time with a specific scope, is a start.
This is another one of those weird things, because I think you've done a good job, in putting the committee together that you have. But I think with the particular community of folks that we're talking about, there is a hesitance to really get involved and really speak out. These families are ones who have very, very unique circumstances with every one of their students. They're all going to be very different, based on what they've got going on. Some are more willing to speak up than others. And so I think that having this ad hoc, and I had to Google it to make sure I was using the term correctly, blue ribbon, committee, it sounds fancy. But what it is it removes all of the other stuff. It is non-political. It removes all of the other things where we kind of say, hey, you guys are going to do your own thing. We're going to kind of set the rules in terms of how often you meet and what your goal is. And we're hands off until you come every other month or whatever and give us that information. We have given you a specific set of questions to answer or a problem to solve. Come back and see us, once you've done all that. And I think removing district administration will help do that. I imagine that if we took the same group of people, that are in the current committee and gave them the same problems and then removed all of the admin, not to say that you're not, that you and your team aren't, I just think removing that element has the potential to allow a little bit more freer movement of thought.
So what I'm hearing you say is you want a committee with parents and the board, remove all administration.
No
Is that what I'm
board,
hearing?
parents,
Not
just,
board.
just where the board kind of says, reading through, the kind of scenario, we have applicants, the board then reviews those applicants and kind of selects, hey, here's the 15, 20 folks, whatever that we're going to put on there. We give them their, kind of marching orders. We say, see you in 60 days, see you in, 60 days after that for, reports. You guys are on your own. We're going to teach you how to do sunshine stuff because you got to follow all those rules and all of that. But then we'll see you, and if you don't do these things, then we would have to make a change. But we allow them to do the things that they need to do to answer those questions that we have.
Okay, so I'm trying to make sure I get it right. So the board will select 15 parents to form their own committee. They would go off and they would study and they would do their own thing, and they would then report back to the board.
That's generally how I understand what we're trying to do, correct? Is we're looking to kind of formulate a committee of sorts that we're kind of tasking to, review special education in the school district, to then come back and advise the board on different things.
So then, again, transparency is great. We want more parental input. When we have a one-sided affair with all we have are parents and there's no administrative input, that I think could lead to further issues. And when I say that, the way we operate right now, we hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. The people that are on our committee are representative of a lot of parents that are out there. And what it sounds like, it's okay, we have these parents that have these complaints, but they don't want to come forward. So we want to form a committee so that we can hear these complaints, and then they'll bring it to the board, and then board will tell administration. The dynamic of it, now, when you start removing administration from the conversation, that's when things could go awry. I
understand that. I know that there, the potential there is obviously that, this committee would come in and say, well, we want all of our students back in their regular classrooms, all of that. I certainly understand that. And there are financial aspects to that. There are human resources aspects to that. I guess it's kind of also like, it's been a year that the committee that you have exists, and I don't recall ever hearing anything about anything that's ever happened with it.
Well, because
So
Yeah.
at least with this committee, the board has given the direction, the board has given timelines and said, hey, your first meeting is in May, and we are expecting then in June a report of how things are going.
So typically, the board formulates its decisions and its actions through recommendations from administration, because there's legal components to it. There's a body of knowledge that comes to it. And our committee has met 3 or 4 times. We spent a lot of time determining what the ground rules are. We determined objectives, we have action steps, we have purpose in what we're doing collectively. So until we get this survey back, which took some time to do, there is nothing there. But if the board needs to hear more, do more. As a matter of fact, I think President Waters had invited one of the committee members to present to the board, and they felt, they weren't quite ready, or there wasn't enough yet. And that's because we were developing. It wasn't something that we were just throwing things and making it stick. We were very purposeful on what we were doing, because the outcomes of this is that everyone works towards improvement. That's why nothing has really evolved from this yet. But again, we want more parental input. I agree with you 100%. We want more. We want to hear more, because we know we want to get better. That's the
So
bottom line.
if I could,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt. There is a large meeting in this room at noon, and they need to be able to set up for it. What I'm sensing from this discussion is that we're not quite sure, like, exactly how it's going to happen and the dates need to be tweaked, could I suggest that we come back to this discussion at another point? Just this part of the discussion. I think we made good progress on listening sessions and the third monthly meeting, but this needs a little bit more tweaking, both for the goals and the, like, what it's actually going to look like. So Paul and April, if you could kind of revise your proposal, and then maybe in the meantime, have a conversation with Dr. Yearwood and see how your idea and his existing committee would function together, or if it would be a one or the other. Thanks. That takes care of the regular portion of our meeting. We do have a quick executive session. So do we have a motion to adjourn to executive?
In accordance with section 610.021, 1313 RSMO, I move that the Columbia Board of Education meet in executive session immediately following adjournment of this meeting at the Administration Building, 1818 West Worley Street, Columbia, Missouri, for the purpose of considering personnel recommendations, personnel issues, and confidential or privileged communications between the districts and its attorneys.
Second.
All right, roll call vote.
Mr. Willoughby?
Yes.
Ms. Farrow?
Yes.
Mr. Cobbins?
Yes.
Mr. Harper?
Yes.
Ms. Snodgrass?
Yes.
Mr. Lyman?
Yes.
Ms. Waters?
Yes. Okay, so we will just need to appoint a board secretary. I don't have